So what we finally have, and there's not really notes here, but you can definitely look in your textbook. We have this idea of like as a citizen of the country, we have rights, and those are things that we have simply because we are Americans. They cannot be taken away from us by the government or by anybody else. But there's also this idea of responsibilities, and responsibilities are a lot more complicated because for the most part, responsibilities are voluntary things. They are not things you have to do. And I'll define that here in a second. They're things that most of us would argue you should do. And so if you don't do them, there usually isn't a penalty. So what I'm asking you to do with this last little section here is to think about what is a voluntary responsibility and what is a required responsibility, and to be able to differentiate between the two. So if you look at the very end of your section, what you'll see are some examples of both. The way that we would define a required responsibility is basically if the government is going to issue some type of consequence to you if you don't do this thing, we would say it's required. So, like for instance, voting. A lot of students initially think of that as a required responsibility, but there is no penalty in the United States if you choose not to exercise your right to vote. It's a responsibility. As a social studies teacher, I would argue it's a really important responsibility, but it's not required. It's voluntary. There are some countries that do have required voting. It's part of the law, and they want to see their citizenry exercise their right to vote. But it's actually more common to be a voluntary thing, like it is in the United States. Other things that are voluntary, you just being informed about issues. Obviously, people don't have to do that. There's no thought police, despite what you might have heard, but it's a good thing to do. There's things like joining the military. That's a responsibility that a lot of citizens, most of us, do not take upon ourselves, and yet it's a responsibility that comes with defending the nation. They're also required. The required ones are shorter because there's not that many things that we would say we're going to punish you if you don't do. Serving on a jury, technically that's not required because like you could just choose to not register to vote, in which case you wouldn't be asked. But if you register to vote and you get summoned to jury duty, you do have to go. And ultimately, if you're picked, you need to serve. Paying taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, there are fines and later jail time if you don't pay those fines. So those would be two examples of required responsibilities. So I would just encourage you to just look through those last couple paragraphs at the very end of section 5 and just jot down in your notes just some examples of voluntary and of required responsibilities. You don't necessarily have to have those in your notes. It just might make it a little bit more easy for you as you are taking that open note test over chapter 6. But that, as they say, is that's the end of our lesson over the Bill of Rights and the responsibilities of citizens. We are going to be doing questions. So if you were reading the instructions that accompany these videos, hopefully you wrote down any questions you might have from any of the videos related to this topic. And we're going to be doing those soon. So anyway, thank you. And I will hopefully see you guys soon.